All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Um, my name is Sam Filler. I'm the executive director of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, the organization bringing you this seminar today. Sorry that we're starting a little bit late. I think the snowstorm may have snowed in our host, Kevin Zraly. So I know probably a lot of you were joining today, hoping to hear from him and see him moderate this great panel. So if he does join, I will step aside and turn it over to him. But we're going to move forward with our panel and the conversation we're having today. And we were excited to have Kevin because he's actually a native son of New York. He grew up in the Hudson Valley, got his first exposure to wine partly through Ben Marl, which was the first New York State farm winery that was licensed in 1976. And we have Matt Spaccarelli on the panel today, whose family owns Ben Marl. So there was that nice connection there. And Kevin has been a proponent for New York State wines for a long time, dating back to his time at Windows in the World. So I will do my best to fill his shoes. I probably have a lot more wine knowledge to accumulate before I am a Kevin Zraly, but I'll do my best. Today, we're going to be talking about Riesling, Pinot Gris, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Franc, Syrah, and Bordeaux. Or Bordeaux blends. So we're going to kick it off today with, the varietal that most people identify with New York, which is Riesling. And so I will turn it over to Ben Sherman and Mel Goldman to introduce their wine and their winery.
Welcome to you all. I'm Mel Goldman from Finger Lakes Vineyards. We're a small place that is known, located, as you might not know, on Finger Lake, and Finger Lake is a relatively narrow but very deep lake. It's about 170 feet deep in front of our vineyards, and it has steep slopes, and from an unbiased viewpoint, it's the most beautiful of the Finger Lakes. The soils tend to be include a lot of shale and leftover deposits from 10,000 years ago, it's a delight. It's a beautiful place to grow grapes because on our property you can't grow anything else except grass or vineyards, and that's what makes it prime territory. We decided a few years ago, following tastings at some very good wineries, Herman Weimer and Constantine Frank in the early 90s, that Riesling was the key grape. And so we've planted about 35 acres, of which more than half are Riesling. We are also believers in Cabernet Franc and the Vignol grape, which some of you may or may not have heard of, which can be grown beautifully here and make excellent dry wines to be served with food. We started planting Riesling in 1998. The Falling Man Vineyard was planted in 2001 and is beautiful. It has lovely drainage. It's a superb site, and it makes consistently year after year wines that have a kind of beautiful long finish and a concentrated fruit flavors. The single vineyard idea, we've also been very fortunate to have excellent winemakers. The winemaker of long standing, Stacy Nugent, who worked here off and on since from 2008 to very recently, was the person that conceived in 2008 of the idea of single vineyards, and Falling Man Vineyard has been the most notable since then. It's probably best that I turn it over to Ben to talk a little bit more about the specific wine that you may be tasting right now.
Okay, thank you, Mel. So we're tasting the 2017 Falling Man which is one of our single vineyard Rieslings from the Falling Man Vineyard, which, as Mel was speaking about earlier, it's a vineyard that's based on the western side of Keuka Lake. It's very, very steep over there, and the soil is such that there's a lot of shale content, as Mel was speaking earlier. And I think this is a very crucial aspect to know about this vineyard. The soils are very poor. There's great drainage there, and that's important for high quality grape production. And this wine is a great representation of the quality and potential of Riesling from the Finger Lakes. Aromatically, it's quite expressive with aromas of fresh peaches and citrus. And you also get some of those classic quintessential petrol notes as well. And on the palate, I think this is where this wine really shows greatly. It's just full of flavor. It's very vibrant with lots of fruit density. You also notice that this wine is definitely dry. There's no more than 2.5 grams per liter of sugar in these wines. And it's our belief, our philosophy that these wines show best in like a dry Trocken style that you see in some German Rieslings. And I think this style affords the wine a sort of liveliness, almost energy on the palate. And this liveliness derives from the bright acidity of the wine, which is typical of Rieslings from not only Keuka Lake vineyards, but from around Keuka Lake in general. So I think this is a good representation of the style of Rieslings that you can expect from vineyards around Keuka Lake. So I hope you guys all enjoyed it.
Just want to remind everyone who are participants that if you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, that's the best way for us to get questions to myself and the panelists. I know, Mel, you addressed this briefly, but the question came through: why is the wine called Falling Man? Unmute yourself.
Ben dealt with this indirectly. He talked about the steepness of the soil, about steepness of the slope, and so we've had minor accidents and people who we harvest everything by hand, so people have, in the course of harvesting and perhaps imbibing a bit too much, have fallen, and so actually Stacy came up with the idea of calling it Falling Man Vineyards.
Another follow-up question is, do you make other single vineyard wines? And if so, how do they differ from Falling Man?
I'll let Ben deal with the latter, but the former, the first part of the question, we do make other single vineyard Rieslings. In 2017, we made 4. In 2016, 2. In 2018, none. We blind taste our tanks before. I mean, and previously it was Stacy and myself, and now it'll be Ben. And then we'll decide, is it worthy of a single vineyard status, and then decide which ones we make. So currently we have 4 on the market. But Ben, you want to do you have any thoughts on how they differ?
Yeah, so we have a group of vineyards that are on the western side where Falling Man is, and they're all very close to each other, and they're all made in the very same way. So we really can see differences, slight differences in the wines that show through from the differences in the terroir. And then some of the vineyards that are located on the eastern side of the lake are very different from the western side. And we find that they're more tropical driven. It might be a little bit hotter. And we have better ripeness on the eastern side of the lake than we do on the western. And differences in floral components and fruit density and just overall power, we see some differences there for sure.
So we get another question, but I think, I know we're going to be doing a Cabernet Franc from Fjord, but I'll put this out to our full panel because I know probably most of you make a Cabernet Franc. So this question is from Ruben. He asked, the best Cab Francs I have ever had have been from Keuka Lake Cab Francs. What is unique about Keuka Lake or the Finger Lakes as a whole that differentiates their Cab Francs? So I guess I'll start with you two, Mel and Ben, but I know everyone feels pretty strongly about their Cab Francs here.
I mean, I can talk about it in very simple terms. I mean, we make a fruit forward, you might say we don't use any new oak in making our Cab Franc. 1 or 2 years, I lie. 1 or 2 years we did use new oak, but in general we do not. It's all neutral oak. And we let the fruit speak. And I think that it's a cool climate, and Cabernet Franc is usually the last grape that we harvest. I mean, we've harvested as late as November 3rd. And it just year in and year out just makes a very easy drinking wine to have with food. And I think this is widely true. If you taste I can only speak about the Finger Lakes because I've tasted widely. There's some other excellent Cab Francs from the Finger Lakes that I think have a similar quality. And maybe Kelby, you can offer some.
Yeah, I think Cab Franc in the Finger Lakes, and I would say broadly in New York State, having shown these wines abroad a few times, really catches people off guard because there's just a magical combination of natural freshness. These are really fresh, refreshing red wines, and yet they're still achieving flavor ripeness at the same time. And I think that combo is relatively difficult to come by. And I think it's also surprising to people because they think of New York and they think of cool climate and white wine. But the truth is, when you can reliably hang, I don't know, Cab Franc in particular until the end of October and still have a wine that is going to be balanced and exciting to drink and pair well with food, you get remarkable flavor development as well without kind of sacrificing, a wine that becomes too flabby.
Great. Thanks, Kelby.
For us on Long Island, obviously Cabernet Franc also grows very, very well. Merlot's our number one planted variety, and I think it's still our number one red variety because I think that's where all the wineries on Long Island intersect. But Cabernet Franc can produce some wines that are the most expressive and that may be the best of the vintage each year. What we see, and I'm sure it's the same in the Finger Lakes and Hudson Valley, is that Cabernet Franc is a more fiddly variety in the vineyard. It's harder, you have to be much more, on top of your viticultural game in the vineyard. It wants to crop more than it should. It gets behind sometimes, depending on the year. And you have to be very reactive in the vineyard. And if you are very reactive and do all the right things, it turns out to be, beautiful red wine. I think that's why it's not a mass-produced wine in any part of the world, purely because of its fiddliness in the vineyard. But when it's ripe and when it's grown well, it's a beautiful red wine. But I'd like to go back to the Riesling, and I'm impressed with the intensity and the weight of the Riesling. How old are these vines?
2001, they were planted.
Nice job. I see that definitely get that petrol characteristic coming through and sort of intensity, and I like the dryness of the wine as well. It definitely is going to age very nicely, I think, in the bottle.
I was going to say the same thing. Kevin wanted us to comment on each other's wines, and really impressed overall with the intensity of this Riesling. And I think that throughout this tasting, you'll note that a lot of these wines have tremendous aging potential. And I think that's our argument for why these grapes deserve a home in New York. So we're starting off incredibly strong with this Riesling. And, I really think that it's not even showing its best. It's going to continue to develop and be really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriella. I think we've noticed that our wines going back to pre-commercial 2003 age beautifully, and the 2006, which was a cool year, is just a glorious wine, glorious Riesling. Riesling, as people know from Germany, is a grape that can age. And if you've tasted some, I don't know about you, but I've tasted some 1970s and 80s Rieslings that are from Germany that are truly glorious, and some 90s from the Finger Lakes that are excellent.
Yeah, I think on Long Island, I mean, there's Riesling grown here. It's different though. It's definitely much more fruity, tropical. Doesn't have as much of this petrol characteristic coming through. I mean, obviously our soils are very different down on Long Island, but I fully agree that Riesling can age very, very nicely, and it's a underappreciated wine in general.
Yeah, I think there's a significant difference between the growing temperature in Long Island versus the Finger Lakes. The Finger Lakes is going to develop that acidity. This wine has beautiful acidity throughout, really nice balance, and Gabriella, the comments to aging are perfect. I mean, I've had Finger Lakes Rieslings from the 70s and the 80s that have just knocked my socks off in terms of being terrific years and years later, 20, 30 years later.
Matt and Kelly, would you like to share anything, or shall we move on to the next wine?
I mean, it's drinking beautifully as Mel's Rieslings always do. And 17 is, he referenced, or Mel referenced 2006. 17 was another just like remarkably cool year in the Finger Lakes. And I think the well-made Rieslings from that vintage have, 15, 20 years easily in front of them to age. I mean, that core of acid is so tightly wound. It's going to be fun to watch them open up in the bottle. It feels crazy opening this wine right now, but duty called.
Well, I do have an update about Kevin Zraly. He'll be joining us. He had an incident with his home due to the snow. So, and it looks like he has just signed on. Hey, Kevin.
Hello, everybody, and I really apologize. My roof just collapsed in my garage. Too much snow. So I'm a little shaken up, but I'm going to start drinking heavily shortly.
So we covered the first wine, the Falling Man Riesling, and we're ready to move on to the Pinot Gris by Red Nude. If you want to jump in, or I can.
First of all, again, I'm a half hour into this, and so that's always a little late. But I just wanted to say that thank you for having me. This is my 50th year of studying wines. I started in 1970, and I started in New York State, and I started in the Hudson Valley. So it's like what goes around comes around. So here I am on the last day of getting close to the last day of the year, and we're talking about New York State wines. I was lucky enough to go to Ben Marl Winery. Well, I went in 1970. That was the first winery I ever went to, and go up to the Finger Lakes and work with Dr. Frank and Herman Weimer in the early days in the 70s. And so just to see the diversity, and I think that boldly New York is what you're talking about, the diversity of all the wines. As you know, this didn't exist back in the 70s. This is almost a dream come true. I know you just did the Riesling, but of course Riesling to me, is the New York State Riesling is a benchmark for in the United States. It is the best Riesling in the United States. I'm not saying that because everybody's on here; it just is, and it's on par, in my opinion, with German Riesling and Alsace Riesling. So, but then you come up to Pinot Gris. By the way, what I said yesterday in the meeting, my job was to finish on time and start on time. All right, so I didn't start on time, so I hope to finish on time, so I don't monopolize everything here. But Pinot Gris, this is something, and then we're going to be doing a Syrah, and then we're going to be doing a Bordeaux blend, and a Sauvignon Blanc. None of that existed. So, what is that expression? We've come a long way, baby. So I'm ready to go onto the Red Nude, correct?
Yes. I just wanted to add also to your comment on boldly New York. I think, the way we feel about it is it takes an audacious spirit to decide to grow grapes in New York State. It's not the easiest place to do it. Before you got on, and we were just talking about this past harvest where the quality was superb, and in many cases the yield was low, but that's just how things roll here. But I think the courage and the audacious spirit that I think pervades the whole state is what really makes our grape growers and winemakers unique here. So that's sort of what we feel like is the heart of boldly New York. And I just want to say, Kevin, thanks for being with us today, and I'll officially turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
I also want to say that I'm a 5-time failure growing grapes in New York State, or only in the Hudson Valley. So maybe the 6th time it will work. So I understand what you guys are going through, from making wine as well to planting grapes. So Kelby's on now, correct? I don't see Kelby. Is he here?
Yep, I'm here.
Kelby. Oh, you were just talking a second ago when I came on. So I apologize for interrupting you.
No.
We have the biggest question I have for you is Harvard. Is that correct?
That is correct.
From Harvard to grape growing. I don't know what your parents thought about that.
They were fine with it. I think when I left high school, because I grew up in the Finger Lakes, they thought I was never going to come home again, and would always be in an East Coast city for the rest of my life. So it took a curious path to come back to home, but they were happy to see it, and maybe they were less surprised than I was to end up back home. Maybe they knew something I didn't.
You're also a musician, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Music and wine go very well together, especially for me. But anyhow, why Pinot Gris? How did you? I mean, I know you grow a lot of other different wines, but maybe you've already talked about this. But the Pinot Gris.
I know. Yeah, we just are getting into it now. Yeah, I know it's a curveball for me. Normally, I'm talking about Riesling coming from Red Newt. That's about 80% of our production, and we do a bunch of different bottlings of it. But we love making these other wines as well. So I like having a chance to talk about them for once. So Pinot Gris, we've been working with a vineyard site since 2006. That is functionally a Red Newt monopole. It's nothing but Pinot Gris and Gewürztraminer. We've made single vineyard bottlings of it in the past called Curry Creek that some people may have seen. And starting in 2017, we decided to, in some ways, roll back a little bit of the single vineyard ideology behind it and really embrace this style of Pinot Gris. The prior versions had been really Alsatian, for lack of a better word, very high octane. They could be 14 or 15% alcohol, carrying some RS yet. But we decided that this was, two things. It's a more enjoyable wine to drink. I think it's less overbearing than those sorts of like showpiece Alsatian examples. And two, this style is just beautiful to drink with food. I think that's really the goal of all wine in the end, is to complement food.
I totally agree. I only have wine with food, only, except now and during this tasting. So take us through this wine. You haven't tasted it yet, correct? You've been primarily on the Riesling, and I apologize again. So has everybody tried the wine? They did try it already, Kelby?
They might be trying it. It looks like they're trying it now.
Okay. Can you take us through the wine? Do you have it in front of you?
Yes.
Explaining what your winemaking method is, what were you trying to achieve?
The goal, and I think my main goal in any white wine in particular I make, is texture. That's something that I'm particularly adamant about and interested in. So this Pinot Gris, the first thing I notice about it is there is a slight copper or pink color to it, which is intentional. It gets an overnight on the skins before pressing off. Not any, we're not leaning towards orange wine or anything like that. But there's so much aromatic potential and textural potential in the skins that we want to express in the finished wine. I mean, the vineyard does a beautiful job growing these really dark clusters of Pinot Gris. It would be a shame to not let that shine through in the finished wine.
So when I tasted it, one of the things that I really liked about it was the aromas that were coming out. It was full, and I got white flower and honeysuckle. I found the acidity was up there, but I guess that's exactly what you're trying to do. It's only 12.1% alcohol or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And somebody asked about food just now. To me, unoaked wine with food is one of the best things that you can possibly do. And so my thing, obviously, I'm going to go with a light white fish. Actually, even something like clams and oysters. And the reason being is because when you go to a restaurant, they give you the clams and the oysters, and they give you a lemon, and you squeeze the lemon all over it. But the acidity in this wine, you already have your acid. You don't need the lemon. What do you have with this wine? What kind of food?
I would agree. I find that the body of it also lends itself a little bit to roast chicken. You know, that's something that I lean towards. We actually just earlier this week made a Roman Jewish veal stew, which is basically just veal cooked with parsley and garlic, and that's something that had a freshness and brightness to it that I think would pair with this wine beautifully as well. You know, there's a lot of options.
Does anybody else on our panel here have any thoughts?
I love the first comment that Kelby said. The first word was texture. That's the first thing, that there's this viscosity. There's a little like phenolic texture that's stunning. I think that is a sign of a really high quality Pinot Gris in my mind. It's not forgettable. It's not watery. It's got that tension, but texture.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's even though it's the same grape, I think the difference between Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio is all about texture. Pinot Grigio is more about acidity and lightness. Where Pinot Gris, again, it's the same grape. It's just where it's grown. What the name is chosen by is and also about the Alsatian. As good as they are pretty overwhelming and can battle sometimes with food. This one doesn't.
Yeah, this wine has a beautiful mid palate. Food, you know, I really wish I had some food right now to go with this. It's absolutely phenomenal.
I especially like the screw cap finish too.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
which is one of the biggest questions I get as a teacher, you know, about screw caps, you know, and what I always say to people in the old days, what do you do with the cork, you know, in the restaurant? Now, what do you do with the screw cap? Do you smell the screw cap? And of course, the bottom line of you know, we have a lot of writers that are on there. And the bottom line I always say to anybody is that 90% of all wines are made to be drunk within 1 year in the world. That's bottom line. Another 9% should never see more than 5 years. So basically, that comes down to 99% of all wines can easily be screw caps. It just was getting people to jump into that, and I think that they're there now. So it's a wine that should be drunk now, in my opinion. There's no reason to hold on to it for a long time. I don't know if you agree with that, Kelby, about you know, ageability of a Pinot Gris.
We have examples. We actually were just selling earlier this year 2007 and 2008 examples of the Pinot Gris from this vineyard, and they aged spectacularly well. I mean, they were perhaps surprisingly well, I should say. So it's something that we always or we never hesitate in telling people to age. It's actually one of the reasons we like screw cap, because we think it helps it age and retain that freshness. You know, this wine actually was just released a couple months ago. This is not like a library release. This is intentional, kind of within, I mean, this wine would have sat on the full lees for a year before bottling as well. So it kind of gets a late start into bottle, and then it takes some time to open up, which I think is one of its charms.
Okay.
Kevin, could I comment just on the screw cap? It was a couple of summers ago, we were at a restaurant over in the Hamptons, and it was a group of wine industry people, winemakers, you know, wholesalers. We were just sort of chatting and ordering some different things, and we purposely obviously ordered, you know, some wines. And the first wine was a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, which obviously is always going to be screw cap. And it was 6 of us, and we were chatting, and the server person came to the table, sort of showing the bottle, and you know, we sort of, he almost didn't interrupt what we were talking about, but and I can't do it, but you know, with some practice, he definitely, you know, did it very, very well. But he showed the bottle, and I sort of said, well, you know, just go ahead and pour it to everyone. And so just in sort of the presentation, he had this, I don't know, his white cloth on his you know, his arm. He rolled the bottle. He rolled the bottle, which obviously unscrews the cap on his arm, and just as that happened, the cap fell into his hand, and he poured it into the first person's glass. That was the best presentation of a bottle that I've ever seen versus popping a cork.
I'll remember that, because what do they say? You know, the restaurant business is show business. So, you know, I've never heard that, so it's great, but I'm not going to be a sommelier anymore. Kelby, I've got to move on, but you're going to be part of our program. So we're going to go on to the Sauvignon Blanc. Please, question?
Kevin, I just want to, there's a couple of different questions for Kelby. One is why the 2% Gewürztraminer? And then, Kelby, have you ever considered making a pinkish Pinot Gris?
Yeah, so to the Gewürztraminer, that is a rounding error. We had a little bit of Gewürztraminer that wouldn't fit into a barrel in the 2017 vintage, and in full transparency, we track that 5 gallons went into this tank, especially since it came from the same vineyard site. But it's not an intentional blend, and many years it's just 100% Pinot Gris. There's nothing happening there. And then in terms of the pinkish, we kind of let the chips fall where they lie. This gets at least 24, sometimes 48 hours on skins before pressing. The 2018 version is an electric pink color. The 2019 is lightly pink, and we just kind of let it be where it's going to land.
Great, thank you. I guess we're going to Russell. Yes, Russell? We're moving out of the Finger Lakes, moving into the North Fork. And of course, I have to ask the question, I don't know, because my roof just caved in, you know, with 1.5 feet of snow. Did you get any snow out there? 3 feet? 3 inches. Okay, well,
it was a heavy, watery event.
Yes, I know all about it. So, you know, I've noticed something about, you know, the people that are involved in today's tasting. There's a little bit, in a way, of Australian and New Zealand influence. I will talk about that as we go on. But, you know, Sauvignon Blanc is, especially for food, for me, is one of the great wines. I think the first 3 are perfect food wines. And so what was your inspiration for this Sauvignon Blanc? Because I know your background, Australia, a little, you know, New Zealand kind of thing, because I don't get any New Zealand characteristics in this wine at all. So I'm just sort of curious about what you think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think you sort of got maybe the bookend, New Zealand on one end, which is super high acid, super over the top, you know, fruit aromatics, and then Loire on the other end, much more minerally, you know, flinty, more, you know, delicate aromatics. I think we're sort of, you know, somewhere not in between, but leaning definitely more towards the, you know, with the Loire style. That's what our area gives us. You know, Sauvignon Blanc, you know, it's probably the white variety that I drink the most. So with Suru, for everyone who may not know, is Susan and Russell Hearn, so SURU. We kept it simple. We picked varieties that we enjoy drinking and grow well on Long Island and in the Finger Lakes. We do make a Riesling, but we source the fruit from the Finger Lakes. Everything else comes from Long Island. We have sourced Pinot Gris from Finger Lakes as well. Sauvignon Blanc to me is it's just a great food-friendly wine. It works well with, obviously, Long Island especially has a tremendous amount of seafood. And it's just a wonderful pairing to seafood and lighter fare. Try to keep the acid up, but maybe not that screaming high sort of acidity that New Zealand comes through with. I suppose a small side note is that I met my wife, American, 35 years ago. Well, actually no, we've been married 35 years. So I met her 39 years ago in New Zealand. So New Zealand has a special part in our heart, and definitely a part of our wine consumption. We enjoy drinking this wine. So Sauvignon Blanc was planted on Long Island in the early days. It didn't do well. It's all of a sudden made a resurgence in the last, say, 15 years. And not because our climate necessarily has changed, but in the early days, in the 70s and the 80s, when it was first planted, we plant, you know, a lot of the pioneers planted on different rootstocks, and the rootstocks were more Californian-based rootstocks in the respect of water-seeking, 5BB, SO4, and that worked against the variety. We want rootstocks on Long Island that, you know, don't find water, try to, you know, are drought stressed in many respects, so as to to lose the water that we all see on the East Coast during the growing season. So Sauvignon Blanc can become very vegetative if it has too much water. And I think the plantings that are now on Long Island are on 10114 and definitely less water seeking rootstocks. And as a result, the clone or the variety, if you will, is really expressing better and better quality. And there's a number of really, really good Sauvignon Blancs being grown on Long Island. Later on, you'll taste McCary Bergen Road, but one of my favorites on Long Island for sure is the McCary Sauvignon Blanc. Jamesport makes some beautiful, ones. Leib Sellers produces. So there's a number of good producers of Sauvignon Blanc, and it's probably the most newly planted variety that is going into the ground in the last, say, 5 to 10 years from a white wine standpoint. So.
And there's always a discussion, we're going to get to it when we get to the red wines, what's the red grape of New York State? I hear Merlot, I hear Cabernet Franc, maybe down the Hudson Valley, they might say Pinot Noir. I don't know. That's what we're here to discuss. But I was extremely impressed. My benchmark is Sancerre. And I lived there and in France, and that was my go-to wine, all the time, still is 50 years later. And that is, and I'm not, patronizing anybody here, and I look at the acidity that you have in this wine, and I get that lemon lime zest in the beginning and at the end of the wine. And I'll tell you, this is a problem in California. They can't get that kind of acidity, if you will, a Loire Valley acidity. So for me, and again, the price, I'm surprised at all of your prices, by the way, how low they are. Maybe I shouldn't tell you this. Maybe the writers,
thank you.
Yeah. And how about some other of our panelists? Comments on the wine?
I opened this last night, and I have to say that I opened all the wines last night, and today this wine is really shining. It's way more aromatic, way more complex and long. So I know patience is difficult when tasting, but I would encourage everyone that has this open to hang on to it for at least another 24 hours. It's really opening up.
You're talking to wine writers. They're not going to wait 24 hours. So me being one of them, I'm going to try all your wines, the first 3 whites. I'm making shrimp scampi tonight. By the way, I've never cooked in my life, but the last 10 months, I've become a cook. Not a chef, but a cook. Any other comments? Because I want to make sure that we get everybody in, and we can always go back. We're going to have questions from the crowd as well. But Matthew, are you around? I don't see you on my chart here.
Here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. As you heard me say earlier, I know we're not talking about Ben Marl, but in a way we are. And the Miller family and Mark Miller and Eric Miller. Actually, Eric Miller was a bartender at the restaurant that I worked at up here. People think of me as Windows on the World, which I started in 1976. But from 1970 to 1976, I worked in a 4-star rated New York Times, rated by Craig Claiborne, with Pierre Fronet and Jacques Pepin. And Eric actually was a hippie. And I hope you all know who I'm talking about. If you met Eric Miller, his hair was down to, over his shoulders, and playing guitar. Kelby, another musician. I knew nothing about wine. I was a Irish steak and potato guy. And he said, "Come to my vineyard. Let me show you what my dad and I are doing." So here you are at another winery. So why don't you explain that connection?
So I also work at Ben Marl as the winemaker and vineyard manager there. But Fjord Vineyards is just a little side project that my wife and I started. My family purchased Ben Marl back in 2006 from the Millers, from Eric and his father. And kind of through the first 5 years, we revamped the place, pulled out vineyards, and started replanting. But at the same time, I was planting some other vineyards throughout town, an acre here, an acre there. 2014, my wife Casey and I decided, hey, let's start our own label. We have all these little kind of cool, unique vineyard sites, and we have a winery to make it at that we don't have to pay rent at, so give it a whirl. So that's kind of where Fjord Vineyard started.
So I have a book. Some of you might know it. You can see how tattered it is right now. It's called Wines of America by Leon Adams. And I'm 20 years old. I'm just starting off in wine. And I read this book, and I get to page 12 or something like that. And it says, winemaking, grape growing and winemaking began in New Paltz, New York in 1677, planted by the French Huguenots. And actually, that's where I'm calling from right now, New Paltz. And New Paltz actually extended all the way over to Highland. I don't know if you even know this. So Highland was part of New Paltz. And of course, that's where the grapes were growing. Let's take a look at your wine right now too, because you know, I mentioned Cabernet Franc as possibly being the red grape, and what you were trying to achieve with this particular wine. If you could take it with us as well, I'd appreciate it. Sometimes it's hard to get winemakers to taste the wine as I'm tasting it. Did you open up a bottle?
Have it here, yep.
Good. All right.
So this vineyard, and with Fjord Vineyards, I get to play around a little bit more, I guess, than with some of the other wines that we make. So this is sourced from 2 different vineyards, 2 different clones, one planted in 2007, clone 336, and one that's on its 4th leaf, which is clone 327. They're completely different aspects. One is southwest facing, the other one's on an extremely steep east facing slope. Listening to Mel talk, it's the same thing. Everything's carried in into the vineyard, just because of the steepness there. But we do let this wine spontaneously ferment. We don't inoculate it, except for 2018, which was such a big of a year. So around 15 days on the skins, open top fermenters. We really don't encourage the fermentation to get super warm. In this case, you can really enjoy the lighter side of it, a little bit less extraction, a little bit more fruit forward than some of the other styles that we do in tank, extended macerations, things like that. And then this goes into 2 to 4 year old punch in and 225 liter barrels for what is 9 months or so.
I'm glad you have to look at that, Matthew, because everybody's always asking me, okay, how much oak is in this wine? How much new oak is in this wine? Is it a 2nd or 3rd oak? You know, and you know, how can you remember all that stuff? And you know, you're the winemaker. But I have a question for you, Cabernet Franc. You know, we were talking about earlier about Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc. Obviously, you benchmark for you for Cabernet Franc. Not that it has to be a copy, but what region in the world, Cabernet Franc, do you like to drink?
All over. I mean, really just the variety, I think, can be expressed in a lot of different regions, cool regions, warm regions. Cabernet Franc rosés I find to be really beautiful. And it's that kind of versatility in the variety that I really love, because we have such a vintage variation is something we're dealing with on a very large scale here in New York, especially here in the Hudson Valley. So, you know, it gives us a little bit of flexibility in style, where some years in 2018 we made all rosé because it was such a challenging vintage, but we were able to make something nice out of it.
The thing I remember about Ben Marl, of course, my first Hudson Valley wine was Baco Noir. And of course, the famous Céval Blanc. I mean, that's basically what Ben Marl was all about. By the way, I helped Eric clean out the winery before you came in, just so you know. But what I got in this wine, you know, what am I going to call it? Cabernet Franc lighter style. Okay, you were even talking about rosé. And when I picked it up to smell it, it brought me back to memories of being in the cellar at Ben Marl and the you know, young wine fermenting, which always brings me back to Beaujolais, just so you know. And when I was smelling this wine, I was getting, first of all, it was very fruity, which is good, not a negative. And I was getting raspberries and a little bit of spiciness there. And so I'm always thinking, you know, what does it remind me of? And not just a Beaujolais, but actually a Cru Beaujolais, a much higher level. And also the finish on the wine, it lingers, it's on and on and on. So I'm asking our panelists some comments.
I I have to jump in. I've been, for the last few years, comparing Cab Francs from really across New York to, not to other Cab Francs, but to Cru Beaujolais. I think that's the real, I mean, obviously there's clear differences, but that's where they speak the strongest to me. There's this beautiful fruitiness, but underlaid with a real darker, savory herbal notes, and they're just spectacular. I mean, I want to have bistro food with them. They just scream out for it. And this is a beautiful example of it, especially for a 19 to be singing like this already.
Other comments? Well, I'm going to say this, that the first wine I probably had might have been the Baco at Benmarl. And of course, you know, being so young, I don't know even what I was tasting. But at the restaurant that I worked at, we had, matter of fact, I found the list from the early 70s of the New York State wines that I had on that list. And some of it might remain, some of you might remember some of the Bully Hill. Does anybody remember Bully Hill? Walter Taylor. Benmarl, of course, I had your Sèvres Blanc 1972, and the Baco Claire. I don't know why, I don't even remember that. 1970.
Probably still have a couple of those in the cellar.
Okay, you know, I just saw it right now here in Abordy Vineyards, which High Tor Vineyards, which was in Rockland County, and Dr. Frank. You know, by the way, in those days it was called Pinot Chardonnay, not Chardonnay, Pinot Chardonnay, and I had it on that was in 1970. I had it on the wine list. But the first real French wine that I ever enjoyed was Beaujolais. It was a Beaujolais Village, and what goes around comes around. To me, Beaujolais is one of the great, Cru Beaujolais right now is one of the great wines of the world. It's actually come full circle for me. And I think that, again, the wine's coming across. Why can't we do more of this is what I'm saying in New York State. Because that's what people, it's light, it's easy, it's refreshing. It goes well with food, as you just said. So I would love to see more of this. And I know there's so many different Cabernet Franc styles in New York, but I like this, what's the word? Something that's comes at you right away. Anybody else have any other comments? Anybody else? Go ahead, Russell.
Yeah, Kevin, I liked what Matt had sort of said about the production style. I think that obviously, say in Bordeaux, there's the 5 reds. Cabernet Franc is the only of those 5 that are a thin skin variety. So I think handling it in the cellar is much, you should be making it more in line with Sangiovese or Pinot Noir or versus a Cabernet Sauvignon or Petit Verdot is much thicker skin variety. So I think the hands-off, not the hands-off, but the gentler extraction, the shorter period of time on skins works really well with Cabernet Franc, and it shows in this particular bottle. I think that you can have anywhere from this to a little bit richer, a little heavier tannin style, being made in New York as well. But both are beautiful expressions, and we spoke about it a little bit earlier before. Unfortunately, you were able to get on. But Cabernet Franc is a variety that grows very well in New York in general, as long as you're on top of your vineyard practices. And then stay away a little bit, from too much extraction in the wine. I think Matt's example is a perfect example of that.
We've done some tank ferments with it before, where we've done some delestages, and it just comes off as too aggressive. And like you were saying, that kind of more gentle approach, I think, allows the wines to, even a little bit cooler, slower fermentations, just allows the wines to be a little bit broader on the nose and palate.
I think in Napa, there's definitely a couple of very nice red wines that happen to have Cabernet Franc on the label. And I'm not knocking it that way, but if you said to me, poured me a glass of a couple of them, and you'd say, "What do you think of this red wine?" "Oh man, I like this wine. It's just structure, tannin, fruit characteristic is very, very nice, but I couldn't tell you what variety it is." And I think when you get into warmer climates, that's where Cabernet Franc loses its elegance and its prettiness and aromatics that we see here in New York.
Yeah, I think Cabernet Franc gets flabby in a warm climate. Cabernet Franc for me is similar to Chardonnay for New York in that it can grow well across the state. And across the state, it's going to taste different. It's going to taste a little bit different in Long Island, where it's a bit warmer, than it is in the Finger Lakes or the Hudson Valley, or even here on the western side of the state. But in every one of those regions, there is a similarity of fruit and acidity and balance that comes through across those two varieties across the state.
I remember Bruce Schneider. I don't know if any of you know Bruce or knew Bruce. He's no longer in the, that I know of, in the wine business, but I was very, very impressed with his Cabernet Franc that he had out in the North Fork. And actually, I brought it to the Hudson Valley. And again, I said, I'm a failure. So please, understand I'm a pretty good writer, maybe a good teacher, but now the vineyard thing is not working out for me. But I did make it into wine, but it was didn't work, is what I'm trying to say. But you've done a fantastic job here, Matt, with this wine. And I just wish there was more of it. I wish there was more of the Sauvignon Blanc, the Pinot Gris. Riesling is here, and then I'm going to move on because I'm sure we're going to have some questions at the end. Duncan, are you there? We were talking about Syrah now. If you had told me 50 years ago that I would have a Syrah from New York State, I really would have thought you're nuts. And also the quality of this wine that you sent to me. So maybe you should tell us a little bit. I always like to know, like my whole thing is benchmark, benchmark Sauvignon Blanc, Loire Valley, Sangiovese, Tuscany, Sauvignon Blanc, Loire Valley, Syrah or Shiraz, why are you doing this? Especially where you're located. And I noticed all the red varietals that you're growing as well. So I'd like to know a little bit about the climatic conditions and what you're trying to do. Okay,
thanks. So Arrowhead Spring Vineyards, we are on the west coast of New York State. So Niagara County, about as far away from Long Island as you can get, I think, in the state. Climate here is a little bit warmer than the Finger Lakes by a touch. Big influencer here is Lake Ontario. The escarpment is a outcropping of limestone that's a few hundred feet high. It runs east to west. Soils are clay loam over limestone. Lots of fossils. Very much a limestone-based soil. Long days, of course, being this far north. We're not influenced by ocean storms. So hurricanes that come in generally stop before they hit us. We're more Midwest climate influence. We decided to start a winery back in 2004, and we're going to plant Merlot, Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Chardonnay, and Malbec. Went to a seminar at Brock University in Ontario, and they were talking about survivability of Syrah, which was better than Merlot at the time in Niagara on the Lake Ontario, just across the river. Made a last-minute decision to change the planting from all Merlot to half Syrah, and haven't looked back. 95% of what we grow is reds. I can't get enough Cabernet Franc in the ground. Every year we plant more Cab Franc. Seems to be a favorite of everybody. Vineyard is sustainable, no herbicides. We do mechanical cultivation. We do spray for fungus because it is New York. It is a humid climate, and growing is a challenge every year because every year is different.
You also brought some Tempranillo, correct?
So we've got Tempranillo in the ground right now, and I'm pulling it out. So Tempranillo, along with the Malbec, were really experiments that didn't pan out over time. I'm glad we did them. I got some great sourdough starter from the Tempranillo this year. So, making sourdough bread like everybody else in the world. But yeah, some things don't always work out. Other things we have planted here, we've got Pinot Noir, a lot of Pinot Noir, very popular varietal here. We planted some Viognier this year along with more Syrah. We'll see how that does. Looking forward to doing some blends there. Most of our reds are blends. And we find that in New York, with the variability of climate, it allows us to mix it up and keep the flavor profile the same, and keeping the grapes more or less the same, but the different percentages different. This Syrah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. If you, I love to hear what you're getting out of the wine.
Yeah.
So take it away. First of all, I put this wine in the second spot. Obviously, you know, weight-wise and color-wise, you can see the difference. It's got all three poured out here right now.
Yeah.
This has got you know, more body than our previous wine, and great color. So 2017. I want to remind people we've got 3 years of age on this wine already. So take it away. What are you getting in the aromas?
So with Syrah, I'm getting white pepper, a lot of dark ripe fruit. Get a little bit of vanilla. That vanilla is coming off of American oak. These are aged in oak puncheons, so 500-liter barrels, double-sized. And generally speaking, I am not using new oak for the Syrah. It is at least 2 years old. We found that too much oak on Syrah really screws up that the aromatics and the balance. I like Kelby's comment on texture. Texture is something that I think is important to all of us, and I guess I never really go there in my head with an actual description of texture. But texture for this wine is a big component. It's very silky. It's got a great mouthfeel. Fermented open in 1 ton skins, like most of our reds. And my favorite pairing with this is barbecue chicken thin crust pizza.
And what pizza?
Barbecue chicken thin crust pizza.
Okay, fine. Anybody? My comment is I got the pepper, I got the medium body, I got the balance, I got the texture, I got the mouthfeel, I got the finish, and you know, I never know when I buy a bottle of Syrah from anywhere, I never know what I'm going to get. So the winemaking here is balanced, and I think that's the key to every wine we've had so far. Is there's a balance of the fruits in this acid, perfect acid balance. The tannins not overbearing. I could see you drinking this wine tonight, not with my shrimp scampi. I'll do the whites tonight, maybe tomorrow. I see this wine aging. What have you seen with this wine in other vintages?
So we've been making this wine since 2008. That was the first harvest off these vines, and I still have 2008 that I'll pop a bottle open every now and then. It's drinking great. Big difference between Syrah from New York State and Syrah from other parts of the world, especially places like California where it's warm, is we get that peppery flavor and the balance, that balance of acidity. I think the warmer climate Syrah is almost a different animal altogether. So it's usually very alcoholic and really big and really jammy.
Yeah, this wine is not jammy. And this wine, I wrote down a word. You wine writers can take it as far as you want, but tasty. This wine it was tasty. It gave me pleasure without being overbearing. And I'm saying as we come up to Makara here in a second, that people that are writing about these wines and what we were talking about before, the diversity of New York State, I would say to everybody in the United States, watch out. Watch out what's going on in New York, because it's amazing, the diversity of all of the different wines. Anybody else have a comment on the Syrah? Go ahead, Russell. Russell, you don't have to raise your hand, Russell.
Just chime in.
I know I'm a teacher, but you don't have to raise your hand.
That's right. I need to go to the bathroom. Please.
Oh, that's okay.
No, I agree with all the comments, and I'm impressed with the color. Not that the color means a tremendous amount in the scheme of the glass of wine, but a huge chunk of our the wine consuming population drink with their eyes, and so a dark wine must be good versus a light wine such as a Pinot Noir probably may not be as good. So I think that this one starts out really well. Suru also makes a Shiraz, not a Syrah. But so I agree with the white pepper. I think that's a beautiful example of, I mean, flavor coming from the wine. And I'd like to sort of, it's obvious to us in the industry here in New York, but it's maybe less obvious to other people maybe listening in. But alcohol is I think the key to all of these wines, and I mean less alcohol, 12.5%. Allows the fruitiness to come out, allows the texture to come out versus the heaviness and the weight of alcohol. I enjoy a good Australian Shiraz, but you know, at 14.5, 15%, they can dominate, the meal, and they can dominate the palate. Where the lightness of alcohol here is, I think, a key, key area that we all intersect on. So good job.
I would like to ask anybody on the panel. This is again, as a writer, this is some of the questions I get, about climate change and what it's doing. As you know, probably know, in Bordeaux, they're now allowing 5 new grape varieties, not for the really great wines, but they're allowing 5 new grape varieties. They're looking for different grape varieties even in Napa. And I always say, I'm looking to myself, well, let's ask the question first from anybody on the panel. Have you seen over the last 10 years, let's say, and you have records of other things going on, what is climate change doing in New York State? I open it up.
So I can speak to cherry harvest since 1973. My wife's family's been farming fruit in Niagara County for generations, and her cousin keeps records of cherry harvest. And in general, they're almost 3 weeks earlier for cherries than they were in 1973. It's over a longer period of time, but it does speak to the general trend.
What does that do, though, for, I'm just curious, where you're located, would you have been able to do a Syrah? Not
in the 70s.
Okay, there you go.
No.
There's so you're answering my question. Yeah, climate change is real, and it's now allowing New York State to do other grapes that they might not have been able to do before. Somebody else?
Yeah, I came here in Long Island in 1990, and my sort of rule of thumb in 1990 was, apart from Merlot, which ripens most years, but my rule of thumb for reserve blends of reds, maybe like the McCary that we're going to be tasting, is you got a reserve blend in the 90s, probably five years out of 10. In the 2000s, I sort of changed that to like 7 years out of 10. And I think in the 10s to 20, that we've just sort of experienced, it's heading more towards 8 years out of 10. So although we have some, more weird events happening because of climate change, and that's the real part of climate change, we definitely are getting enough warmer that it allows some of the later varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, Thibodeau, that go into, my, reserve blends to fully ripen to be able to do that, where you weren't seeing that in 96 and 7 and 8. Maybe in 7 you did. So we are definitely getting a little bit warmer for sure, and riper. Our viticultural practices have improved dramatically also to allow that. But it's a combination.
That actually leads me in, because I want Gabriella to have some time here. I told her that the other day. Thanks everybody for doing this, because Gabriella, you have a full 15 minutes if you want it. Finishing on time, starting on time. And so I'm throwing the question out to you. You're 3rd generation now, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you grew up with it, but where you are right now, any climate change feelings that are going on for the grape varieties that you're growing?
I think, and I was just having this conversation with someone who manages the Ontario wine region. People are like, climate change, does it mean that you can ripen grapes in Ontario? And she's like, no, we could have always ripened these grapes, but what's happening is that they're just more sporadic, kind of uncontrollable, unforeseen events that are happening. And I know we were just actually joking in the chat not to talk about 2018, but we're not releasing a 2018 red. We just didn't feel the quality was there. And I think that I'm scared that that's the future, right? We'll have more years like 18 that just kind of just throw you for like a shock. So more rain, more mildew. We're in a very humid climate, and I think that that's kind of the scary part. But yeah, is it positive? Can we now ripen Cabernet Sauvignon where 5-10 years ago we couldn't? I think that's an interesting point as well. Our cab in the 2000s was lean and kind of green, and pyrazines were popping, but now we actually can get that muscle from the cab. So good and bad,
Well,
but I think this is.
What happened in 2018?
Huh?
Pardon?
What happened in 2018? Because it
Just
didn't happen.
it was just rainy. Russell we probably. It's like, what else can we say? It was bad.
Was it
18 and 11 were the most miserable years that I've been in the winemaking world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I think too, this is a great segue, the vintage variation comment for Bergen Road, because we've only made this wine 10 times in the past 25 years. My grandfather purchased an old potato farm on the North Fork in the 60s. It laid fallow until 95 when we planted. And that was the goal, right? Was to sort of make this Grand Vin, make this wine, because Cornell told us to plant Merlot and Cab Franc and Cab Sauv and Malbec and Petit Verdot, because they were the great wines of Bordeaux and they were the great grapes of Bordeaux. And we were sort of at that time comparing ourselves to the region. But we didn't realize that we would see such vintage variation. And as crazy perfectionists, we only release this wine when we feel it's ready, when we feel that it has the power and the intensity and the complexity to age. So I think that the vintage variation comment that Matt brought up, that Russell's bringing up for New York State in general, is a really powerful one. And for years we were fighting it and kind of wondering, why are we working in this region? But, the contrary is the same climate conditions every year. I was just on a webinar with a team from Chacra and Patagonia, Argentina, and they're like, oh, it's perfect here every year, but how boring is that? It's not exciting. It's not, you're not studying vintages and seeing what happened and when, and measuring temperatures and weather and things like that. So the variation, I think, is pretty powerful and interesting.
I was on the phone yesterday with my counterpart, wine writer Karen McNeil, the Wine Bible, one of the great books out there. She's actually revising it. A long conversation. Feel good. 2018, you made something. Napa, 80% is lost. 80% of all Napa grapes are lost. People like Chuck Wagner are going in there to buy up the wine. He's going to try to figure out how to get all the smoke taint, out of that whole thing. So this is one of them, it sounds like I'm loving every wine, and I am, but I'm just so happy to be able to, in my lifetime, see, if you will, a Bordeaux blend. Why don't you tell them exactly? Why don't you tell them the grape varieties then? Because Merlot is number one, and then tell me everything that's in this bottle of wine.
So 40-30 Merlot Cab Sauv, and that's where you're getting that structure, and like a lot of that, plum fruit comes from the Merlot. And I was just joking, for years, like we were making 100% Merlot, and we were always like, oh, like in its youth, the Merlot is quite boring, and then it actually develops really nicely. But in a youthful Bordeaux blend, when it's backed up by the tannins of the Cab Sauv, when it's sort of in this concert of aromatic intensity from the Malbec and has a little like deep color from the Petit Verdot, it really shines. So it's Merlot heavy, right bank heavy, kind of like is the inspiration. And then, we have all these other grapes planted because we were told to plant. So we're kind of stuck with what we have. But I do think that each component adds something quite interesting. So like the choir, right, is better at times and more interesting than the soloist. And that's why this wine, I think, represents New York, the potential, if you will.
The new New York.
Hopefully.
Again, I'm really that old. Actually, this is my last day of doing any kind of lectures. Tomorrow I turn 70. So it's like, it's a birthday party that we're having here right now. Although I feel 50, of course, for all the good wines that I've had. But this wine, I was really intrigued by, and if you could do it with us, the aromas that were in this wine. I also did open these wines the other day, and this wine actually, you know, I'm not a big say, oh, you got to let a wine breathe, you got to do that, but in this particular wine, I think it needs to open up. So what are you getting? What do you get in the aromas of the wine?
I mean, I always get this kind of like underbelly of raspberry in a lot of our reds, and I think throughout the state, I think that's a very powerful description. But there's this savory complexity coming from the cab that's shining. I think for me too, besides like the aromas are interesting now, but the most fascinating thing for me with our wines in particular is how they age. So this is 15, it's 5 years old. I think it's still pretty youthful. But once it starts becoming tertiary, once the fruit starts becoming a little desiccated, I think that the wine really becomes more interesting. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things about these blends is that, yes, in their youth, they're delicious and the structure's there for the people that really want the tannins, the youthful kind of pungent, you know, in your face tannins. But the development and the power of the development of these wines as they become tertiary, I think is really fascinating. So picture this, you know, in 5 more years with a little kind of like dried fruit and maybe more harmony than now.
I'm getting a little, I'm just tasted it again, a little cran apple in there because of the acidity that's, again, it's so nice to have a red wine with all of these grapes that still has the acidity, which I find that a lot of wines around the world don't have that. It's all driven by fruit and tannin. So you have a fruit tannin acid here right now. And I'm just saying we moved up, obviously, you know, from the wine styles. Other people have some comments. I don't know if you had a chance to try this wine ever before.
I'd like to sort of reinforce what Gabriella said about the ageability of, especially, I mean, I'm more familiar obviously with Long Island wines, although try to taste wines from the rest of the state. But I think Long Island serious reds go through an evolution, and after about, say, 4 years after the vintage, you know, so no matter when it's bottled, but after about 4 years, it sort of goes into a little bit of a dull phase. So it was expressive and it was fruit forward, and then it seems like it just sort of like flattens and goes down for a year or two, and then 5, 6, 15 years later, the good ones, and here's one, really get better and better and better. So I think this is to me at least, I'm sort of impressed that it's already starting to come up. I think it's got a long way to go, and I think that to the climate change scenario, 30% Cabernet Sauvignon, 15% Petit Verdot. I think that shows something in us that you wouldn't have done that in 1995.
99, yeah, exactly. The other interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, good. I was just going to say, please answer, do what you want to do. My question is, from the older wines that you still have in the cellar, how? I mean, this wine to me is, I could suffer through it tonight, you know, with a steak or something like that. But out of all the wines today, here's the one to age, and this is already 5 years old. Again, something I would have never talked about. So ageability, and you were going to say something else.
I was going to say, I just had a lovely conversation with Louisa Hargrave, and I was talking about her inspiration for planting here and how she got here in the 70s. And she basically told me she was looking, her and her husband, they were just looking all around the US for places to plant. And they ended up, you know, they're in California and Virginia. And at that time, they were drinking a ton of Bordeaux. They were drinking the 70s, you know, like epic vintages of the 60s and the 70s. And they realized that they couldn't emulate that style, which is what they wanted to do. They wanted to make fine wine, you know, high quality wine that will age. They couldn't emulate that style on the West Coast because the wine was just too bombastic and there wasn't enough acid. And even in Virginia, they felt they couldn't get that acidity. So I think kind of full circle, we're trying to really still push that quality forward by making wines that have the potential to be laid down. And yeah, in the cellar, my mom always blind taste me on wines, and she sometimes sneaks in, you know, old Long Island wines. And recently I was like, oh, Mom, this is obviously Saint-Emilion. Thanks so much. Who is it? You know, and it was Long Island. So I think that is really interesting, so the way that the wines are holding up.
You're doing a lot more than trying to do a great job here. This is a fabulous wine. super balanced.
This is something I don't say in New York State. This is a world-class wine. And ageability, Gabrielle, you didn't tell me about the other vintages that you might have. Stock.
Oh, so we have 10. We actually, so I made the crazy decision to hold back the 2 pallets of the 2010. And I kind of a la champagne, release the wine that's a little bit more supple and showing lots of fruit. So we released the 15 while still having 2 pallets of the 10 in stock. And we're selling the 10 to some of the wine club members and some people. And I think the 10 has way more structure. I think will probably hang on a little longer than this 15, if you can even picture that. I think the 15 has this fruit ripeness that the 10 doesn't have. The 10 has more more of a shoulder, if you will. But other than that, the other Bordeaux blends tend to be holding up. This is controversial, but a little bit better than some of the single varieties that we have in the cellar, in my opinion.
So Kelby, can we actually see this up in the Finger Lakes?
Yeah, the aging trajectory is really remarkable. Just a couple nights ago, we were doing a tasting and opened up a 2007 Cab Franc from one of our single vineyard sites here, and it was really just hitting its sort of secondary peak, just starting to get into some of those jammed or cooked fruit and tobacco leaf sort of aromatics. And it's, I think the thing that speaks to the ageability of these wines is that even in the somewhat, at the time, off vintages, or not as impressive, 2007 was kind of like 2010 here, renowned for being a great red vintage. The 2008s are actually aging better, and that was a slightly cooler year. So you don't even need, some blockbuster ripe vintage for these wines to age elegantly.
Matt, are we ever going to see this in the Hudson Valley? Because I might go back to grape growing.
Well, I think one thing that we're addressing here in the Valley is high pH wines. It's kind of an issue in our vineyards, and because of that, I think it's making it a little bit more challenging to make wines that are fully ripe, but also have that potential to age, especially in your reds. So I think that's a vineyard thing that we're working on here. But the length of our season is pretty small here compared to everywhere else, but it's really intense, especially really warm nights. I think that's why we're seeing our pH is really high and things like that.
Okay, I'll come and visit you.
Yeah.
In the spring, by the way. I'm not coming today. Okay, just so you know.
Snowmobile?
But, yes, snowmobile.
Yeah.
But we only have a couple more minutes left, and so I'm going to ask each of you, and we all have our own agenda, but I'm just sort of curious, if you had to name the red grape of the future of New York State, you can actually have 2 votes if you want. So, Gabrielle, I'll start with you because you had to wait so long to be on.
I think if it was one grape, right? I just made an argument for a blend, but I think if it was one grape, for me, the Cabernet Franc is the most exciting, and yeah, for sure,
Okay.
for a red.
Kelby?
I would say I would have to go with Riesling, I think.
Well, actually, I'm talking about red.
Red.
I'm actually taking that almost as a given because of the fact of how much Riesling there is versus Sauvignon Blanc versus Pinot Gris.
Yeah,
So on a red wine basis.
I would have to go Cab Franc as well. It's such a terroir expressive grape. It's just fascinating to see it across the state.
Okay, Russell?
I think from a state standpoint,
Yeah.
I would go Merlot 1, Cabernet Franc 2. I think from a winery, or a region standpoint, I'd flip that. But I think from a state, I'd do Merlot, Cab Franc.
Okay. Matt, Hudson Valley?
I would say Cab Franc, mainly because from that statewide standpoint, Merlot is a little too sensitive to be grown sustainably. Here, I know folks are doing it up in the Finger Lakes quite well, but it's one of the reasons why we grow so much Cab Franc here is because we can get through the winters and get it to ripen each year. And kind of the second what Kelly was saying is it's so terroir expressive. People look at New York State and the wine region that we're all all the regions are so different. I get to work with Cab Franc from Long Island, here in the Valley, Finger Lakes. With Ben Marl, we actually sourced some fruit from up Niagara Escarpment this year, and they're just totally different beasts in the cellar. I like that aspect of Cabernet Franc.
Okay, Duncan, you're in a different area. So are you still with us, Duncan?
I am.
Okay, good. I can't see you on the pictures here right now. I don't. So your assessment of red grapes?
I agree with Cab Franc. I think Cab Franc and wines based on Cab Franc across the state. It's very consistent producer and very expressive of the terroir. My second choice there would be Pinot Noir. But again, much like Merlot, it's probably not well suited across the state. Cab Franc, hands down, across the state.
All right. We've heard it from everybody, ladies and gentlemen. You've all gotten the chance to taste all of these wines. I do need help with my garage. If anybody's in the area, I have to do a lot of shoveling now and move things. You all know what that means, right? You've all had these experiences. So this is the first time I think in my life, so it's 50 years later, that I've ever been late for anything, like a seminar or anything to that effect, never missed anything. So I thank all of you and I wish you all happy holidays and great wine. Thank you.